All right, so we finished up our rebuild on this motor, and I got good compression. Everything checks out good. Running about 150 plus PSI on the cylinders. Of course, I got this rattly starter issue. So I figure while I'm working on this motor, since I'm not in any hurry to build this bike, I will do a few of the tests to see what might improve that starter grind. Right now, just for a baseline, let me get a video, and I'm going to do for each one of these, I'll do a slow-mo close-up. And you can see the gears, see the engagement and all that. So first off, just to get a baseline, what I'm going to do is pull the plugs out. And you'll notice when I pull the plugs out, see if I can get them out of there. When I pull the plugs out and crank it over, there's no additional compression from the cylinders. And so it'll just spin, spin, spin and stay engaged. And I'll take a video of that here in just a second. So let me get these plugs out. And then we'll crank it around for its trial without any compression. All right, so we got the plugs out. So theoretically, without any compression on that cylinder coming down, that starter ought to stay engaged and just rotate and rotate and rotate like a normal motor would. So what I got set up here is the hot wire tied in directly, just like it ought to be. The ground wire is strapped right to the bolt on the starter. And then I got a little solenoid. And over here, what I'm going to do is simulate a weak battery versus a fully charged battery, because this battery is kind of marginal. It will still crank the motor over, but it's not as strong as it could be if it was a brand new one. So here we go with no plugs. So there you go. Sounds perfect. Sounds like it ought to be a winner, right? Let's set up and take a slow-mo inside of the oil fill plug there, and we'll get a shot of that in slow-mo so you can see the gears engage and they stay engaged. All right, so now we're ready to put a plug back in, and we're going to see what this sounds like once you give it some compression. So keep in mind, there's no ignition of the motor yet. This is all just the mechanical action. All right, so now I'm going to crank it. So here we go. Wham. You get a rotation or so. But all you get is a rotation. All right, so let's turn on some power. We're going to add some current to it and see if it does any better with a little more power. Not really. So let me get a video of that in slow-mo, and then we'll set up and see if we can make some improvements to the starter. Alright, so we got our case off. Like I said, I didn't drain the oil, I just tipped it back. The oil all goes down there, so then we can do some of this. So first try we're going to do is we're going to pull this mechanism out, and we're going to put our short spring in. So let me get that took out. Put our short spring on and see if we can get any better engagement. We are standing back up, and we got our short spring in there this time. So let's see if it makes any difference on how this thing does with the short spring. So I don't have my power on, so I'm going to do the low voltage or marginal battery, and then we're going to try it again with a little bit of current pushing too. So here we go. We got our short spring in, and we're going to see if it'll engage a little better. So let's give this a try. Whoa, look at there. That actually made a difference. So let me try it with the high start on. She still jumps when the power's high. So it actually is better to have a little bit of marginal battery, it sounds like, unless that was just a fluke. Let's see. That's a little better, but it's still kicking out. A little bit better. So having not a stronger battery seems to help a little bit. So let's get us a little slow-mo with the short spring in there and see what that does. Alright, so we're back after testing the short spring. So now we're going to tip it over and we're going to try the option of taking a little clamp. This is my spare gear. Taking a little clamp and pinching it on there so it tightens this up a little bit. And see if that can't restrict that gear a little bit from spinning. Let's tip her back up and take her back apart. So we're going to leave the short spring in there, and we're going to take this, and I'm going to keep this gear just in case this gear is different and it might throw off my study. So what I'm going to do is take this little clip and I'm going to put it on there and then make sure that it can still get in the groove. So it's going to be really close to dragging on those gears, but we shall see. So let me get this thing modified and hopefully we can clip that on there. Alright, so we got our little clip put on. Now we're going to put it back on the gear and we're going to lock this thing back down. Make sure that it'll clear, so it's clear in the pocket. I'm going to make sure it's not dragging right there when I put it back together. Alright, so now we got a little tab in there. Looks like it's clear and everything. Actually can come away from that gear just a little bit. So I'm going to scoot it back that way just a little bit. Just make sure it doesn't drag that gear. There we go. Now we got our short spring and we got the little tab. So let's see what that does. We'll get this thing put back together. Alright, so now we got our little clip in there that goes on right here. This is my spare. So I still got the same gear I was using before, but I put that little clip on there. So let's see what this does. So this is with the charger off, so this is just a regular battery. So now let's see what kind of noise it makes when it cranks. Whoa, looky there. It didn't miss a lick on that one. Started cranking a little bit slower, but that actually may have helped some. So let me boost the battery up like a normal battery. And let's just see what it sounds like when it cranks. Well, look at that. That little clip thing actually helped quite a bit. It's not missing at all now. And all I did was just put the clip on, and I have the short spring in there. So let me get a slow-mo of that with a weak and a strong battery. And let's just see what that does. All right, so adding that little clip in there really seemed to help quite a bit. So it's got my curiosity up as to whether or not it would actually disengage. If it's too strong, so I'm going to take my wrench and I'm going to crank it over, pop it like the motor's cranking, and just see if that gear will disengage or if it stays right up to the edge of the flywheel and it's just going to grind the entire time I'm going down the road. The gear is still engaged. It jumped back just a little bit. So now, if I pretend that I fire, I actually don't hear it dragging. Can't quite get my eye in there. But yeah, it's not hitting it, even with that little spring in there. It cleared it back out. All right, so we saw from those previous experiments that taking the spring and going from the full spring to a shorter spring, so cut, I don't know, a couple curls off that dog. So going to a shorter spring seemed to help just a little. Maybe it let it engage just a little further, not sure. But adding that little clip on there versus not having the clip, this is the old gear, not having the clip, that helped a bunch. So it slowed the starter down a little bit, so I guess you'd have to make sure you had a better battery, and it might impact the speed, so you might drop more voltage and you might have to get a stabilizer, which is probably a good idea to get anyway for these. But that seemed to help a lot, just putting that little clip on there. And so now I'm thinking, well, we've gone this far. So this is an old side cover that's off of the parts motor that I had that I was using to rebuild the other one. And so it's got some problems. It's got a broken thread hole right here, and one of these bolts is broken out that I would have to get out of there, some of that. So not too worried about using this one. So I'm going to experiment a little bit. So if I'm trying to get, let's just say we got our gear right here. When it flies out, hang on, I'll get the other piece. Okay, so if this is our shaft, it sits down in that hole right there. This one's a little messed up. There's our shaft. So here's our gear. There's our big spring. We'll just use it. And then there's this thing. So when it's sitting up here, when it's all together, that sits really close to the edge of that, sits down onto that aluminum right down there. And so as it flies out, this is steel, and so it flies out, engages, and this thing's sitting like right there, and it cranks to rotate, and then it flies back up when it's done. Okay, so right here, there's a little bit of room between that and the edge of this cover, so I got a little room there, so it could come down and engage a little further without that really hitting anything, but it runs into the bottom down here. So I got to looking at this old case, and what I did is took a socket and find the socket. I took a socket and I took the shaft off, and what I did is set that socket on there and hit it with a hammer and actually knocked that little rubber bearing looking thing that this floats in, knocked it down all the way to the bottom. And so it gave me a little bit of room. And so what I'm wondering is if I could get that in gear to engage fully by maybe machining this down right here down to that surface. But what that's going to do is all of this then is going to sit further, so this side is going to have a gap. So let's go over here to the motor and see if that's going to impact anything. We'll bring all this back over there, and then we'll see what it does if we were to have a gap on the other side before we go cutting on our spare cover. Alright, so we are back over here on our motor to try to see just what would happen if we let this whole set come this way. So what would it do? Because it might misalign the gears so bad that it ain't going to work. So let me put the big gear on. Normally it has one of these. So I'm going to put that on, right? And I'm going to put it with the flat part. I'm going to put it this way just to see. Alright, so if we look in here with that one normal spacer in the back and this gear is flipped around this way, they're pretty level. But I don't think that's the way that gear goes anyway. So let me take that gear back out, flip it around the other way, and let's see. I'm going to pull that back out. I got just the one shim, so I'm going to flip it over this way and reinstall it. So when you flip it around that way, up against the edge of that, you can see right inside of there that it's actually a lot lower. And so there is a little bit of room. So let's just say if I do want to cut some off of the cover, what happens if I add two of these? So this is off the spare motor. I'm just going to add them back to back, and I'm going to put them in there, and I'm going to have the gear facing this direction so it still rubs on it on the surface right, but it may push it out a little bit. Okay, so now if I look at that, if I look down in there, maybe we can see that the gear is actually not too far out. It's still got plenty of engagement, just barely higher than the starter gear. So that might actually work, that we could add two of those spacers to the backside, which would allow me to go back over to the cover side, see, with two spacers in there, go back over to the cover side and take away the thickness of that spacer out of that cover, and maybe it's going to let that gear engage a little further. Alright, so looks like it might work. The only other problem we might have is if it can't go far enough back when it disengages, that it might get stuck on the starter. But we do have a little bit of rubber right here, and this one and the other ones I've got is kind of worn off like this, so what I can do is just trim that rubber off, and that's going to buy me a little bit of room to see if I can't get that distance that I need. Okay, so let's go back over here and set up and see if we can machine this off. Alright, so I currently don't have a nice mill that I could mill that off. Flush down to that surface would be super nice, but I do have a router, and I can probably set it up close as long as I don't touch my router blade down to that hard little bearing surface. It won't eat my router up, and then I can take down that last little bit by hand or something. But I can get the majority of this off with a router, but I got to make sure that it's perfectly level, because I don't want to mess things up, because it's going to have to line up and be level on that surface. So in order to do that, when they machined this thing, this was flat, right? And then that indented, so it all should be parallel. And what I did, I just bolted it down to the table. So got me a sheet of old Lexan. Stuff is super hard, and so I'm just going to bolt it down to this so I can establish a flat plane to run my router on. So that we don't hit something. So it's unplugged right now. I'm just going to put it down on there and line it up so it just touches the top of the bearing. Okay, so it's right now I risk hitting that bearing with my router tip. So what I want to do, I got the stop set over here. I just want to take my stop and move that stop just a little bit. So in order to make it go that way, what I want to do is put something between my stop and my router. And so let me pop my router back up. Okay, so then I'm going to put something in between my stop and the router face. And when I drop it down, then that'll prevent it from being as low. So I just put a 10 thousandths feeler gauge in there. So now I should have around 10 thousandths to go. I'd rather be high than low and tear up my router a bit. So I will try to keep it high. I can always sand it down a little bit later. Okay, so that's definitely looks like it's clearing that bearing. Okay, so let's set up and see if we can route this thing out. We're going to cut some metal out of here. All right, so aluminum did fly everywhere. That is the truth. But we were able to route that thing down. Now we got to blow all that aluminum out of there, and we'll see what we got. All right, so we are set up to reassemble this with the shaved cover. So I tried to do an assembly and discovered that with that shim right there with the rubber damper in between is too thick for what we can get off of the cover. So I just took a torch and heated it up just a little bit and got that rubber soft and took it out of there. So now we got two little shims of nice hard steel that we can put what used to be the rubber side to what used to be the rubber side, and now we can do some reassembly. So let's get our shaft, and what I'll do is just put these behind this. So we'll just do it like that. That way the damper's still up by the gear. Now we got a little damper sandwich. And let's put our gear on this orientation. Slide him in. And we can reassemble with the big spring, regular spring, and no clip, because I want to kind of see what it'll do for just having that machining surface machined down. Looks like we're lined up pretty good. So now let's see if we can get a cover on. Alright, so we're fitting pretty solid there. So I think we got enough room. So let's tighten all these bolts up and then spin it around and look inside of there and just see how much engagement we got now. Alright, so we can see that with the case machined down a little bit, and then we added the little shim over on the motor side, took the rubber thing out of it, you can see that it still clears the flywheel when it's disengaged. So let me spin it around, and you can see that it's not touching. Alright, so let's give that a try and see if that keeps it engaged or what it does, and we'll make a slow-mo of that one as well. Alright, so let's give this a go and see if just by machining and setting that in just a little bit, if that'll keep it engaged or if it's going to make it kick out. Alright, so here we go. Well, it stays cranking, but it's just as noisy. We'll take a slow-mo of that and just see what it's doing inside of there. And then maybe we'll combine all three together, the short spring and the clip and pulling that over, and just see what all of them together do. Alright, so we are going to try all of them together. So what we're going to do is the short spring, a little bit of spring, we're going to use the clip, and we're also going to put the spacers in, and we're going to use the case that I machined out. So let's get all this put together and see what it does with everything changed out. All right, so here we go. So we got our case on that's been machined back a little bit. We got our shims in the back. We got the short spring, and then we have the one with the clip on it. So we got all three on there. So we crank this. Let's see what it does. Still a little noisy, but it's engaging better. So let me try it with full battery. Not too bad. Still a bit noisy. So let's get the slow mo down in there and just see what all three do. Well, alrighty, so there we have for our experiments, and we'll make a decision on what we want to do, but I think for sure I'm going to go with that little clip on that Bendix gear. Alrighty, well, thanks for watching.